Well, let's take you live now to our SABC News reporter, Khayelihke Khumalo, who's covering the public lecture by Zimbabwean academic and commentator Professor Ibbo Mandaza. The theme is the state of democracy in the SADC region and a reflection on the national elections in Zimbabwe. Kaya, good evening and welcome. So this is all happening finally after initially being postponed. And I remember interviewing Professor Mandaza in the aftermath of that postponement, and he was flummoxed by this.
After a couple of days of postponement, so the lecture will happen tonight here at Wits University, but also most importantly, we do know that his theme will be around the recent elections in Zimbabwe. And of course, there was a great deal of concern from the opposition parties in Zimbabwe who were saying the elections were held in the climate of fear, but also citing the intimidation of voters and really the issue of the credibility of the elections. But also this was reaffirmed by the observer mission from quite a number of areas within the SADC region itself, the EU members as well, and the Carter Center from the US and the Commonwealth, just essentially not painting a very good picture about these recent elections, Iman, really just pointing to a myriad of concerns, especially directed to the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission in terms of their logistics, Iman, where you had about 75% of the urban areas where there were no ballot papers and all kinds of logistical nightmares that really face the voters. Really were quite determined to really cast their votes, especially because others really had to wait for 10 hours, 8 hours to make sure that they really exercise their democratic right. But a lot has happened in Zimbabwe now, Iman. We saw the inauguration of President Emmerson Mnangagwa, where he was really reaffirming that he will continue with his second term, and his primary focus is around the revival of Zimbabwe's economy, but also making sure that this southern African country is able to re-engage with the West. But as to how will that happen, it remains to be seen in light of the recent election results.
So Kaya, it is, if we know Professor Mandaza, this is not going to be some lukewarm public lecture. This is going to be in many ways, and he hinted to that in our interview earlier on that initial postponement, that it was going to be a critique of the situation as it is, and also in many ways a call to action. So the audience there, I'm sure, are really excited to hear exactly what he's going to say tonight. Give us a sense of who's there. Are people trickling in? When is this all kicking off?
All right. So everybody's waiting with bated breath for the lecture, Iman. So it's going to start exactly at 6 p.m. So far, it's only just few people who have arrived here, but we do expect quite a lot of people to attend. As you know, that the ANC's, Oliver Tambo School of Leadership, it's also at the forefront in terms of these arrangements. But also you'd recall that the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula had indicated that one of the key reasons that so the initial postponement was around the issue of making sure that they do have those talks with their counterparts from ZANU-PF so that they try and get an understanding, especially in light of the very recent elections in Zimbabwe, where quite a number of commentators were not quite impressed with some of the concerns that were raised, and also you had the main opposition party, the SABC, really rejecting the result. In fact, to use the phrase that their president Chamisa used, he said it was a gigantic flaw, but also really just talking about a number of issues. So like you just said, we're expecting Professor Mandaza really to be quite scathing in terms of his critique, because he has been really focusing his energy in terms of the political dynamics in Zimbabwe, especially as a lot of people really were expecting so much from the first term of President Mnangagwa. He spoke at length about making sure that, political parties, there's free movement, but also making sure that the opposition parties are able to exercise their democratic rights. But also the elections in Zimbabwe really were preceded by some of the killings of the SABC activists, as much as you do have some very serious implications as well Iman, in light of what has happened in Zimbabwe. For example, you do have the European Union that has withdrawn its funding of the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission. But of course, the Zimbabwean government has downplayed that, saying this is one of their key institutions. They will continue to fund it. But also, Iman, we saw yesterday where the Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema had a virtual meeting as a SADC chair of the Troika, looking at security, politics, and also many other issues within the SADC region. So we're still waiting for those outcomes in terms of what will be the direction of SADC in light of these elections and a litany of irregularities that were pointed out.
Well, certainly set the scene in such an enticing way, Khaya, for us all to pay attention to what's happening there at Wits University. These events kick off at 6 o'clock, and we will definitely bring you the opportunity to dip into it and hear some of what Professor Ibbo Mandaza has to say. As Khaya is saying, it's bound to be, really animated, just bearing in mind what Professor Mandaza said before and the situation and developments politically in the SADC region, Zimbabwe specifically.